This video was meant to be a shorter review, no longer than 20 minutes, but the more I started writing it out, the more I realized that Cyberpunk Red has plenty to talk about. If you want the absolute briefest possible review and just want to know what I think of the game, then know that it's an excellent role-playing game that I rate very highly. It's not flawless, and I'm going to address some issues in this video, but overall it's a top quality game for players who like systems with a bit more crunch to them. This book is also packed full with setting. If you liked Cyberpunk 2020, you're going to like this. You may not like all of the changes compared to the old game, but you're going to like many of them. If you didn't play Cyberpunk 2020, but you're familiar with the Cyberpunk 2077 video game, then you're probably already sold on the world itself. There's a lot of edge to Cyberpunk, and that's carried throughout this book. If you're completely new and know nothing about the game, then I recommend that you watch the rest of this video to learn more. I'm not going to delve too deep into the nitty-gritty of Cyberpunk lore, but I am going to talk a lot about the game as a game. If you end up liking this review, please like, comment, share and subscribe. I'm going to review Väsen and Mörkborg from Free League next, and I do a lot of non-review content on this channel as well. If you're a fan of Cyberpunk and like this video, consider subscribing as well, because I plan to make more Cyberpunk content in the future. Anyway, let's get to the actual review. Cyberpunk Red is the successor to Cyberpunk 2020, and it continues the timeline to 2045, well beyond the Fourth Corporate War, when the conflict between the mega corporations Arasaka Security and Militech Arms reached its climax with a nuclear blast in Night City. The time of the Red began with an eerie blood-red tinge filling the sky as a result of atmospheric particles from the nuclear blast and debris from orbital rock strikes, conventional explosives, and the annihilation of cities and crops. This red hue lasted for nearly 2 years, but even though the sky was once again blue, the time of the Red carried on into its aftermath. For those of you new to the Cyberpunk franchise, it's probably best to start at the beginning. Already back in the 1980s and 1990s, technology soared behind the scenes. The West Germans developed organic circuitry in the late 1980s, and synthetic muscle fibers were used to control prosthetics in the 1990s. Before the turn of the millennium, the world had bioengineering, cybernetically enhanced soldiers, and Martian colonies. This rapid technological advancement filled society with a cultural technoshock where many freaked out and rejected these changes. Others decided to hit the future head-on, establishing the movement now called Cyberpunk. The Cyberpunks are those who aren't afraid of getting the newest enhancements, whether it's getting plugs in your wrists, weapons in your arms, or biochip programs in your brain. It's also an attitude. The cyberpunks wear fashionable clothes, know the right people, hang in the right clubs. As a cyberpunk, you need to remember these important facets. It's style over substance. It doesn't matter how well you do something, as long as you look good doing it. Attitude is everything. Think dangerous, be dangerous. Think weak, be weak. Live on the edge. Risk all for a big score. Mike Pondsmith, the brain behind the game, proudly calls himself the man who killed your Cyberpunk character. This game caters to the one who dares to run on the edge. Cyberpunk 2020 ended with the Fourth Corporate War as depicted in the Firestorm book Stormfront and Shockwave. These can be seen as the culmination of the 2020 storyline and the transition into the Red storyline. Major scenes related to those events are depicted in the Red Corebook as chapter fiction, so you'll be able to familiarize yourself with all the major plot points without having to read any of the older material. The world after the war is called the Dark Future for a reason. There was more or less a total breakdown of society. Governments and corporations were in ruins, and it was a slow process to pick up the pieces. The 2045 you play in still suffers this aftermath, but the pieces are starting to come back together. The Cyberpunk Red Core book is 458 pages. It's a tome of a book, and it gives you everything you need to get a strong overview of what kind of world this game introduces. The amount of setting details in this book are the results of decades of world building, and they are comprehensive enough to merit their own videos. In this review, I'm going to put more emphasis on the actual character and system details that you need to play as a cyberpunk, but I'll try to be as comprehensive as possible to give you a good idea what the book is about. I'll then give some additional thoughts by the end of the video. There are 10 kinds of cyberpunks you can play as, all having their own roles and affinities within the game. If you played 2020, you should be familiar with them, though their individual role abilities have been changed and made more elaborate. While I'm not going to go into detail on what every role ability does in Red, they all provide options that drastically change the way that role is played. The rocker boys are the street poets, the social conscience or the rebels in the time of the Red. They challenge authority head-on through lyrics, art or raw emotion. They have an ability called charismatic impact, which lets them influence others through sheer presence of personality, with the ability to reach grander audiences as they grow in skill. The solos are the freelance guards, killers for hire or the cyber soldiers in the time of the Red. They fight using cyberlimps, reflex-enhancing bioprogram ships, as well as combat drugs. They have an ability called combat awareness, which lets them call up their training to enhance situational awareness on the battlefield by dividing its value across a number of other combat abilities. The Netrunners are the brain-burning computer hackers that plug into corporate secrets. They are part of a team with the solos to cover their backs as they slip into digital systems to steal, trade and sell what secrets they find. Their ability is called Interface, which lets them access a number of actions related to computer hacking and system control. The techs are the ones building, fixing and modifying the technologies found in the time of the Red. Their black market work lets them make friends and enemies alike, and they can earn a lot of Eurobucks taking up solos or corporate samurais. Their unique ability is called Maker and lets them fix, improve, modify, make and invent new items, with higher ranks giving access to new related specialties. The medtechs are artists with the human body as their canvas. They are ripper docs performing illegal street surgeries, or if they are lucky they operate as a member of the trauma team, licensed paramedics who charge heavy subscription fees to save clients. Their ability is called Medicine and it lets them keep people alive who should be dead. A higher rank gives access to new medicine specialties such as surgery, pharmaceuticals and cryosystems operation. The medias used to be beholden to the corporations, but that facade was stripped away with the war. Now they wield their press pass as a weapon, depending on no one but their own fans, contacts and reputation. Their unique ability is called Credibility and gives them access to an audience that grows the more credible they are. The execs are junior executives trapped in the middle of bureaucracies, with people beneath them willing to kill them for their positions and executives above them who'd kill them to keep them from rising up. Their unique ability is called Teamwork and lets them build a team of capable people to do their bidding. The lawmen are armed to the teeth, either wielding their badge to protect the streets or as freelance corporate mercs protecting their employers' interests. They are spending their nights in firefights with psycho squads or armored cyborgs. Their ability is called Backup and it lets them call upon the help of a group of fellow lawmen based on their rank and the conditions under which they make the call. The Fixers have a knack for figuring out what other people want and how to get it for them. They move illegal weapons over the border, steal and resell medical supplies, or maybe trade in favors like a gangster. They have connections in all kinds of businesses, deals and political groups. With their operator ability, they can maintain a vast web of contacts and clients in order to access goods, favor and information. The nomads live in packs, roaming the freeways looking for supplies, odd jobs and spare parts in a fragmented world. In the time of the Red, their pack has evolved into the masters of getting people, supplies and materials from safe zone to safe zone across the savage highways. Their ability is called Moto and gives them access to vehicles and the knowledge to drive them. There are 3 different ways to create a character in Cyberpunk Red. There's the Street Rat way, which gives you a number of finished templates to choose from. This is a good way to get a quick game started. Each template has a list of finished stats that you can roll to generate randomly from. The Edge Runner way is fast and dirty, giving you more flexibility to the stat generation. Here you roll randomly for each individual stat using the listed templates. Finally, the Complete Package is the calculated approach to character generation, where you use a pool of character points to allocate your stats. Something that previous editions had and that has been expanded in this edition is the character's Lifepath. This is a system for randomly generating a character's biography and life events. I was never a huge fan of the Lifepath system in Cyberpunk 2020 because I've always favored a more calculated and statistically even approach to character generation. I've never been the kind of player who likes to randomize his characters. The Lifepath wasn't all bad because it was a good way to provide inspiration for character details that could be used to produce the in-game narratives. The problem in my mind was that the results could be uneven between players, with some characters getting more positives than others and some getting crippling negatives. Cyberpunk Red still has many randomization elements, but the Lifepath system has been improved as a whole. It's a series of tables which you can either choose from deliberately or roll from to generate random results. It starts out with basic character and background information, such as cultural origin, personality, dress and personal style, motivations and relationships, as well as family background, environment and family crisis. This is similar to the way it was in Cyberpunk 2020, but expanded with more options. You also get to generate both friends and enemies. In 2020 you could get either friends, enemies, both or neither, depending on how you rolled. Red acknowledges that Cyberpunk should get both in life, so you get to generate both from the get-go. You also get to generate what kind of conflicts you have with your enemies, as well as the potential for tragic love affairs. You then wrap it all up by generating life goals. Something Cyberpunk Red introduces that didn't exist before are role-based life paths. This gives access to additional tables for the chosen role. For example, a rocker boy gets to generate what kind of rocker boy they are, if they are a solo or a group act, why they left their group if they had one, where they perform and who's gunning for them. A solo gets to generate what kind of work they do, what their moral compass is, what their operational territory is, and who's gunning for them. Every role has similar options suited to their personal themes. What I like the most about this new Lifepath system is that it feels more fair than it did before, and it's largely positive as it only generates narrative information to help shape a character's personality, background and motivations. It's also a good way for especially new players to get characters with actual stories and motivations without having to spend too much effort investing themselves in the setting and writing out an actual bio. There are a number of important stats in the game as well. The main stats generally range from 1 to 8 and are divided into a mental group consisting of intelligence, willpower, cool and empathy, a combat group consisting of technique and reflexes, a fortune group consisting of luck, and a physical group consisting of body, dexterity and movement. While there are a few changes from 2020, the stats are otherwise more or less functionally the same. The reflexes stat from 2020 has now been divided into reflexes and dexterity, making it less of a god stat, and the luck stat is just as superfluous as it's always been. There are also 2 derived statistics, such as hit points and humanity. Hit points is a new addition to Red and the result of a damage system that aims to be more streamlined than it was before. It represents the character's will to live and overall physical condition. As the character takes damage and loses hit points, it eventually reaches certain thresholds that grant penalties representing cumulated damage. When in actual combat, your hit points will be somewhat protected by whatever armor you're wearing too, with armor being purchased individually for either the head or the body. If you wear too much of it, it can penalize your reflexes, dexterity and body stats. Armor provides a value called stopping power, SP, which mitigates some of the incoming damage. Unlike for 2020, when you had different body locations for every limb on the body, it's now been streamlined to only separate the body and the head. Also, you can no longer wear layers of armor with stacking SP, instead applying only the higher SP value against the attack. Humanity is a measure of how well the character can interact with others. This trait is functionally identical to 2020. It's reduced by incorporating body enhancements, and if it drops below 0, the character can become cyberpsychotic, which drastically changes them in ways best to avoid. Just like in 2020, Cyberpunk Red has a lot of different skills the character can learn, but there are some changes to them as well. Each skill is linked to a stat in order to give a total action value, which is added to your dice rolls when resolving actions. Some skills, such as pilot air vehicle, martial arts, auto-fire, heavy weapons, demolitions, electronic security tech, and paramedic, are harder to acquire than others, costing twice as much to learn or improve. In Cyberpunk Red, there are 9 different skill categories: awareness skills, body skills, control skills, education skills, fighting skills, performance skills, ranged weapon skills, social skills, and technique skills, all of which have a number of individual skills the character can invest in. Some are basic skills common to all cultures in the time of the Red and must always start with at least a rating of 2. Characters also start with a rating of 4 in their native tongue. Skills normally range up to 10 and are added to the value of an associated stat in order to derive a total value. For example, if you have Dexterity 6 and Brawling 4, your total value is 10. The 3 different ways to generate characters apply to these skills as well, with the Street Rat method offering you a few finished skill templates associated with your role. The Edge Runner method has several predetermined skills similar to the ones in the templates, but you choose their exact values by allocating points. Finally, the Complete Package method lets you freely allocate points across all skill options. Just like the 3 methods of character generation have helped to determine Lifepath and traits, they also determine your starting gear. The Street Rat and Edge Runner methods have templates for weapons, armor, outfits and gear, and they gain 500 Eurobucks EB, which they can save for the game or spend on other things. The Complete Package gives more money to spend on whatever you want instead of abiding to the templates. Then there's Cyberware. This is the hardware that you've implanted in your body or replaced parts of your body with. It's a huge part of the Cyberpunk franchise and an important aspect of character customization. However, as you acquire cyberware, your humanity is degraded and you move closer towards a dissociative disorder that causes depersonalization and that can ultimately culminate in cyberpsychosis. Someone with pre-existing psychopathic tendencies could become extremely dangerous due to cyberpsychosis, suffering symptoms such as lack of self-preservation, complete disregard for others, poor impulse control, and explosive outbursts. The more your humanity is reduced, the more detached you become from your life, thoughts and feelings. You ultimately feel disconnected from yourself and you can feel compelled to keep changing yourself by cutting off functional body parts and replacing them with tech. There are ways to prevent and mitigate cyberpsychosis, such as therapy, but the best way is to add cyberware with caution. Not all cyberware contribute to humanity loss either, so there are plenty of options still. The only ones that do cause humanity loss are the ones actually replacing functional body parts or that enhance the body beyond the human baseline. Someone who is disabled and who acquires prosthetics as disability aids won't suffer humanity loss for that. The humanity loss only comes with augmentation, never with disability aid, which is an important distinction. Our Telsorian games hired people with disabilities when creating this game in order to attempt to depict cyberware and humanity loss in a way that doesn't objectify or fetishize disability or mental illness. The book's Trauma Team chapter discusses these concepts in detail. Because cyberware is such an important part of the setting, it can be acquired almost anywhere. Some procedures are quick and easy enough to get as drop-in appointments, while others may require more investment. This is represented by the listed cyberware through the terms mall, clinic or hospital, depending on how complicated the procedure is. In total, there are 8 different types of cyberware categories: fashionware, neuralware, cyber optics, cyber audio, internal body cyberware, external body cyberware, cyber limbs, and Borgware. Some cyberware are foundational pieces that act as prerequisite for additional cyberware. This is called option slots, with the cyberware having slots for additional installed features. An example of this is the Cyber Eye, which has 3 option slots that can be filled with installations such as Image Enhance, Micro Optics or Targeting Scope. The Street Rat and Edge Runner templates get some starting cyberware based on their roles, but you can otherwise spend money on purchasing as much cyberware as you can afford to. If you're running out of cash, there are options for getting more. The character can, with GM approval, choose an employer such as the military, joining organized crime, or selling out to a corporation. This provides additional starting cash in exchange for some kind of debt you owe your employer. If you played Cyberpunk 2020, this game is very familiar to you. If you're one of the new guys, the game has what I would call mid-level crunch. It's definitely not a rules light system, but most of the crunch involved come with a fairly densely packed character sheet with plenty of skill options and customization options such as gear and cyberware, rather than the rules themselves. The mechanics come with some hurdles to new players, and you'll definitely need to have some cheat sheets available in the beginning. It's not just a matter of picking up and play. The game uses D10s and D6s, where the D10 is used for action resolution and the D6s are more commonly used for damage rolls. Most checks require you to roll a D10 and combine the result with a stat or a stat with another trait, such as a skill, where the goal is to roll as high as possible. Skill checks have varying difficulty values called DV that you must overcome to succeed. If you roll a 10 on a D10, you score a critical success. This lets you roll another D10 and add the result to your first roll once. If you instead roll a 1, you roll a critical failure. This means that you get to roll another D10 and instead subtract the result from your roll. I mentioned before that I found the luck stat to be superfluous. The reason for that is because this stat doesn't work like other stats. Luck is a resource you can spend in order to increase the outcome of other rolls. For example, if you want to meet DV 17 and rolled 16, you can spend 1 luck in order to increase the outcome to 17. My personal preference is that luck should either be a set value that you cannot change and that's kept separate from other stats, or that it's removed from the game completely and you simply accept your failed roll. One option could be to have luck be more like momentum in Trinity, where you have a shared luck pool that can increase whenever you fail actions, as a failing forward mechanic or a story reward. It's not how it works in Cyberpunk Red though, but it's how it should work in my opinion. In combat, you first determine an initiative order by having everyone roll reflexes plus a d10, where the higher result goes first. When it's your turn, you have access to 1 move action and 1 other action. The move action determines how far you can move on your turn, similar to how speed works in Dungeons & Dragons. The other action can be something like making an attack using an object or stabilizing someone who's hurt. Attacks have a rate of fire, which determines how many times they can be used to attack in a single action. When performing a ranged attack, you roll reflexes plus relevant weapon skill plus a d10 and compare that to the target's DV, which is determined by the range to the target as well as the type of weapon used. A target with reflexes of 8 or more can attempt to dodge a ranged attack by rolling dexterity plus evasion plus a d10, with the result being their new DV against that attack. If you beat the DV, you roll damage against the target with their armor's SP reducing the total. What remains are stripped from their hit points. Because of the way they changed body locations in Red, you automatically target the body unless you make an aimed shot. With an aimed shot, you take a -8 penalty to your attack in order to aim for either the head, a held item, or the leg. Attacks to the head inflict double damage, attacks to held items disarm them, and attacks to the leg causes the broken leg critical injury, which reduces the target's ability to move. A change to Red compared to 2020 is how autofire works. Instead of directly modeling individual bullets like in 2020, Red models patterns of bullets. Using autofire costs an action and 10 bullets, and it uses the autofire skill instead of the typical weapon skill. These cannot be used to make aimed shots. If your autofire hits, you roll 2d6 for damage and multiply it by the amount you beat the target's DV with, up to a maximum determined by the weapon's autofire value. 3 for SMGs or 4 for assault rifles. Melee combat is resolved similarly to ranged combat, save that the opponent can always attempt to dodge even without high reflexes. Melee attacks also ignore half the target's armor rounded up, but brawling attacks do not. A character can also learn martial arts, which gives them access to special moves. Unlike normal brawling attacks, martial arts attacks have rate of fire 2 and ignore half of the target's armor. When you lose too many hit points, you reach certain thresholds called wound states, which starts with lightly wounded before moving to seriously wounded, mortally wounded and dead. These states give you an increasing amount of penalties and make it more difficult to stabilize you, which is needed before you can begin the natural healing process. Whenever 2 or more damage dice come up as 6s, you gain a critical injury, which gives a persistent penalty or condition until treated. Once you become mortally wounded, you must begin making death saves, where you roll a d10 and trying to get a result that's lower than your body rating. If you roll a 10, you automatically fail. After every death save, its difficulty increases by 1, and you must continue to roll until you're either stabilized or dead. Apart from resolving conflicts with violence, you can also rely on your reputation. This is established by your character's actions in the game and then awarded by the GM. The higher your reputation becomes, the more others become aware of you and the more people respect, admire or fear you. Whenever you encounter new people in new situations, you can roll a d10 and compare that with your reputation value. If you roll lower, the person you meet has heard of you. This can be either good or bad, depending on the situation. If you run into adversaries but don't want to initiate combat with them, you can have a face down. This is a duel of wills to determine which one's tougher, meaner, and looks more willing to prove it. Both parties roll cool plus reputation plus a d10, and the losing party can either choose to back down or get a penalty on future action against the winner due to fear. This game system is primarily built around combat, and it lacks a social system with any notion of depth. If you want to resolve situations peacefully and play a more social campaign, you'll have to resort to normal action resolutions with the GM making determinations of success. There's no system for social defenses either, and similar to Dungeons & Dragons, the players have the agency to decide how they respond to threats, bribery and persuasion attempts. I do think that the game could have benefited from a more robust social system, since that could have helped incentivize more social character builds. The closest you get to an actual social system is through role abilities such as the Rocker Boy's charismatic impact. Netrunning in Cyberpunk 2020 was like Tron. You hooked up to the net and sent your mind into it. The problem with this system was that it separated the netrunner from the rest of the group. While the others were out fighting, the netrunner was back at home playing their own game. Cyberpunk Red wanted to change this by bringing the netrunner back into the game. To accommodate this change, the extended timeline brought changes to the net. The core net infrastructure was brought to ruins during the war, and the remaining net was infested with dangerous systems from that war. The worst of these systems were the rabbits, which are deadly AI constructs that hunt and kill anyone they encounter in the net. This is still out there as a plot device for Netrunner games, but the primary Netrunner experience is now more close to the real world. When playing a Netrunner, you can interface with systems using Cyberware, such as interface plugs and a neural link, a Cyber Deck, which is a modular platform containing the hardware and software needed to netrun, and virtuality goggles, which make the net visible to you in the real world, or in meat space, as Netrunners call it. It's these virtuality goggles that bring Netrunners back into the action in Cyberpunk Red, since they can now see both the net and meat space at the same time. If they need to hook into a system, they can do so right there using their Cyberdeck. Netrunners have access to 2 kinds of actions: meat actions, which take place in meat space, and net actions, which take place in the net. The higher the Netrunner's interface rank, the more net actions they can take on their turn. These let them jack in or out of the net, activate or deactivate programs, or use the interface ability, which consists of things like cloaking their presence in the net, attempting to break through encryptions, taking control over systems, pathfinding through net architecture, and more. The tools for the trade when interacting with the net are called programs. The Netrunner can install or uninstall programs to or from their Cyberdeck, which takes an hour per program. The Cyberdeck only has slots for a few programs, which means that the Netrunner needs to think about which ones to load for the specific situation. There's a specific type of program called Black Ice, which is used to hunt down other programs and Netrunners within the system. These dangerous programs take up 2 slots instead of 1 in the Cyberdeck. When doing a net run in Cyberpunk Red, you need to brave a net architecture. The book has instructions for the GM on how to build net architectures appropriate to the difficulty you want the players to face. These consist of a number of floors that can each contain things like programs, black ice, other netrunners, files, control nodes, and more. Each turn, the netrunner can choose to descend through this architecture, assuming they are not blocked by some kind of obstruction. The netrunner isn't allowed to skip any floors and must open each door leading into them in order. For example, if the file is 2 floors down, you may encounter black ice on each of the floors above. You can attempt to slide past this black ice, after which it will hunt you, or you may stop to fight it. When encountering a black ice or another netrunner, the character can choose to engage in net combat by using an attacker program like a Hellbolt, or by trying to zap them. This is rolled using the character's interface plus the program's attack value plus a d10, or in the case of Black Ice programs, their attack values plus a d10. The DV for these rolls is the target's interface plus a d10, or a program's or Black Ice's defense plus a d10. When taking a program or Black Ice down to 0 hit points, or res as it's called for programs, it is de-rest. This doesn't kill the program permanently, but instead makes it useless for a time. In order to get the de-rest program back up and running, the netrunner must spend 2 net actions, basically shutting it down and turning it back on again. There are also very specific types of black ice called demons. These are intelligent systems designed to attack meatspace targets using control nodes. This basically means that the demon is an AI that can control actual systems such as drones or turret defenses in meatspace. It could be that a guarded facility has a demon controlling its defenses, and the group's netrunner must challenge it in the net while the other players are encountering the drones, turrets, or other systems it controls in meatspace. In summary, netrunning can be a little intimidating for new players because it's kind of a game within a game. There are many games where I suggest to new players that they ignore certain mechanics for their early games so that they can focus more on getting comfortable with the fundamentals. I don't make that recommendation in this case. I think that netrunning in Cyberpunk Red has what it takes to elevate the narrative, and I don't want to see new players shy away from playing netrunners thinking it would be too complicated to get into the system. It is fairly straightforward for the player once they familiarize themselves with the actions they can take and the programs at their disposal. The chapter has solid instructions for the GM on how to construct net architectures as well. If you're going to set up a mission for your players that involves breaking into a secure facility, the GM could fairly easily set up a net architecture for that facility using the information in the netrunning chapter. The listed systems can also give a lot of inspiration for what kind of defenses you can give a facility to, as well as what could go on behind the scenes within the net itself. I mentioned in the beginning of the video that the book contains a lot of setting material. The chapter Welcome to the Dark Future goes through the entire Cyberpunk timeline. The chapter The Time of the Red shows the world as it is today, with details from every continent on Earth. This also delves into the Neocorps, the remnants of the old megacorporations, and has details on all of the major players, such as Arasaka, Biotechnica, Militech, Petrochem, and more. Following this is the chapter Welcome to Night City, which gives a thorough overview of Night City, the face of the cyberpunk setting, including detailed maps to show players. Then there is the Everyday Life chapter, which explains society as a whole, from the rules of law to entertainment, communication and transportation. This chapter, The New Street Economy, details the economy and the markets, lifestyle and housing, how to make a living, and it includes several comprehensive lists of items and services. I don't think I've ever seen a role-playing game that's managed to successfully cram this much information in a core book, and while I do think that it's largely positive, it can be intimidating as well. The chapter Running Cyberpunk provides useful details for how the GM should tackle the tome and run the game. It presents the core themes of Cyberpunk and summarizes some of the major groups the players can run into. This chapter not only provides good information on how to GM, but it provides tips on how to structure games and stories overall. There's a lot here that you can bring with you into other games if you want to translate some of the cyberpunk feel into them. The chapter makes sure to point out that a good game of Cyberpunk isn't about saving the world though, it's about saving yourself. The game's focus is street level and with a lot of edge to it, but the interesting thing about Cyberpunk overall is that the street level attitudes kind of extend into the higher echelons of society as well. Even if you end up playing as a boardroom executive, it's still street level, it's just that the boardroom is your street. It's also in this chapter where character development is discussed. Cyberpunk 2020 had improvement points, IP, and those carry through into Red. When acquiring enough IP, a player can choose to increase their level in a skill or their rank in a role ability. There's also a system called playstyle improvement, which allows the GM to reward each player based on their preferred type of gameplay. These gameplay types are categorized as warriors, socializers, explorers, or roleplayers. The GM can determine the primary and the secondary playstyle for each player. After each session, the GM hands out IP based on how successful the group was in their mission that session. If they weren't successful at all, they are rewarded based on their primary or secondary playstyles instead. For example, a solo who failed his mission may be rewarded for his warrior playstyle instead. This is a system that can help incentivize engagement as well as remind the GM to incorporate elements befitting all playstyles so that no players feel left out. Before the end of the GM chapter, there are also a list of goons and other antagonists that can be easily dropped into stories. The chapter also provides a number of scream sheets, which are a series of playable missions, only 2 pages each, that can be played as individual missions in a Cyberpunk game. If you watched all the way through, you know by now that Cyberpunk Red is packed full of stuff. Even this review only scratched the surface of what the game has to offer. I mentioned before that the game has mid-level crunch, which means that it's not too difficult to learn for the average player. However, all of the other content in the book together add to the crunch, making it much more intimidating. One of the negative aspects of the book is that because it's packed so full, there are places where the layout seems cluttered. This is a very text-heavy book that crams a lot of tables into its pages. It's also inconsistent in the way it presents text columns, with 1-column pages mixed in with 2-column pages and even some 3-column pages that include sidebars. It's likely that a new player browsing through the book could easily feel lost or confused by it. A couple of months ago I made a review of Alien RPG. I ranked that one high, a 5 out of 5, and while that game is also a sci-fi game, these two are very different experiences. The Alien RPG core book is a much more manageable core book than this one, and it's infinitely more beginner friendly. I would even say that it's superior in its presentation, but when you compare the games themselves, Cyberpunk Red has much more to offer in terms of world building and character options. I would rate this book just as highly as I rated the Alien RPG, but for different reasons, since in terms of the Alien RPG, the book's presentation elevated the game itself, and in this case, the book's presentation is hiding what is an incredible game. I do think that once you've invested time and effort into actually getting into the Cyberpunk Red core book to the point where you've overcome the text-heavy pages and the cluttered layout, you're ultimately going to be sitting on an amazing product that you'll be able to play for another couple of decades. Cyberpunk 2020 is an old game. It's outdated in many ways, but it's still being played to this day. Cyberpunk Red brings the best of the old to the modern times, and it sets the stage for a new generation of roleplayers to have their cyberpunks head into Night City and start running on the edge. Until Mike Pondsmith kills them, of course. If you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. Also make sure to visit my Patreon for access to more of my content, including playable previews of my own sci-fi game Machineborn. Until next time.